I have a PhD in complex systems physics. So my interest has really been in the issue of the origin of life, because what's happened is a lot of people who research that topic have been trying to explain the origin of life in terms of either non-equilibrium thermodynamics or complex systems or something along those lines, which really comes into my area of expertise. And what I've realized is that when you look at the thermodynamics of the origin of life, it really demonstrates that life could not come about unless an intelligent agent put information into the system. Yeah, so if you talk about Darwinian evolution, it's very successful as a theory to explain very, very small changes in life. Something like finch beaks, how finch beaks might grow larger or smaller depending upon the climate, bacterial resistance. But what we've seen over the last several decades is increasing amounts of evidence shows that it's very limited. So it can explain changes up to maybe a genus, but it certainly can't explain changes at the level of a family or higher. And part of the reason for that is that if you look at what mutations can do that are non-harmful, they can take, let's say, a protein and make small modifications of it. So you have like an enzyme in a bacteria that can, let's say, break apart some molecule, and small changes can help it break apart a different molecule which is similar. If you look at what's required to create a large change, like let's say a fish becoming an amphibian, what happens is you have to alter the developmental genes which control how, let's say, the egg develops into an adult. That's where the architecture of an organism is really put into place. All mutations observed that do those changes are always harmful without exception. If you look at evolutionary textbooks and they try to present mutations that can create large-scale changes, it's typically going to be like a mutation that produces a four-winged fruit fly. The problem is those changes are produced in a laboratory and they cripple the fly. It actually wouldn't survive in the wild. So there's no examples of a mutation which could drive a large-scale change which is non-harmful. So that's a huge problem. Right, so again, the whole idea that you have all these mutations which increase the genetic variety to allow evolution to take place, that only works at the level of a species or genus. So for instance, you look at, let's say, cichlid fishes in the lakes in Africa. You have lots of variety of these cichlid fishes, and some of it's explained by mutations. Like there's a mutation a single mutation to a gene which helps with vision, so it creates a molecule or it helps to modify a molecule to absorb a different frequency of light a little bit better. But those small-scale changes will never turn, let's say, a cichlid fish into an amphibian. What you find is all the genetic variety that we see in every single species only allows for, again, these very, very small changes. There's no genetic variety for the genes that control the basic architecture of an organism, the way the bones interconnect, the way the arteries and veins come out of the heart. All of those genes are the same. There's no variety. So again, all mutations which have been observed, which are non-harmful, only allow for small-scale change, while all mutations which could potentially change the architecture have been shown to be harmful. So what happens is evolution is true in terms of what's called microevolution. That would be changes to an organism that are within the boundary of a genus. So it's taking what you already have and making small changes to it to make the organism a bit more fit for an environment. So you have the beak of a finch, and there's certain genetic variety for those beaks. Some are smaller, some are larger, some are thicker. And that's it, though, is you take a pre-existing beak and you slightly change it to make it a better beak in the environment. That doesn't explain where the beak came from in the first place or where birds came from in the first place. Also, you have bacteria, and you might have a mutation which would slightly modify a gene to help it, let's say, break apart a new molecule. But the bacteria still has the same basic molecular architecture. All the metabolism is the same, the structures are the same. So again, what you find is microevolution can take something that exists and slightly modify it. What it can't do is create anything truly novel, like a new structure, a new metabolic pathway, a new architecture. That's macroevolution, and that has no evidence to support it. Yes, I would definitely be a proponent of intelligent design, where I would argue that if you look at life, what you see is evidence of design. And that actually helps you to do better research. So an analogy would be if a spaceship crashed on Earth, who would be able to understand that spaceship better? Someone that believed it was designed and was looking for engineering principles and the logic behind it, or someone that believed it was simply a product of the blind forces of nature? So they're trying to figure out how volcanoes could produce the propulsion system of the spaceship. Obviously, it'd be much more helpful to look at it from a design perspective. In the same way, when you look at life, you see nanotechnology, you see hierarchical design, you see very similar patterns to human engineering. In fact, if you look at the field of systems biology, what's happened is these biologists and these engineers have come together and they have said, and these aren't people that necessarily believe in design, but they've said that we do the best research if we assume purpose, if we assume teleology, which is just another way to say it's goal-oriented. They argue that if we assume it's highly optimized for a purpose, then that helps us to make better predictions. They look at engineered systems like feedback control systems, and they say, hey, these patterns in human engineering we see in biology. And by applying a design framework, we get better results. Now, they put design in quotation marks, but nevertheless, they're using design logic, design language, and design principles. So it's already been demonstrated that an intelligent design perspective does better science in biology. Yeah, so one of the areas I really specialize in is the origin of life. And what happens is we really can be confident when we say that the origin of life couldn't happen without design. Because what happens is all natural processes will tend towards two different states. Either they go from what's called low entropy to high entropy. That's going from like order to disorder. It's like it's harder to have a neat room than a messy room. A neat room will tend to become messy. The same thing in like biochemicals. And all natural processes will tend to go from high energy to low energy. Water runs downhill, it doesn't run uphill. Nothing in nature will ever simultaneously go to both low entropy and high energy at the same time. It's a physical impossibility. Yet, life had to do that. Life had to take simple chemicals and go to a state of high energy and of low entropy. That's a physical impossibility in any context. In fact, there's been these special theorems that came out called fluctuation theorems. And what they have demonstrated is even in systems driven far from equilibrium, you still get that same pattern, tendencies towards high entropy and towards lower free energy. So that means in all physical processes, nature does the opposite of what's necessary to produce the first cell. What you have to have life is you need engines, machinery that can convert one form of energy into another. So you have like ATP synthase, which will convert the flow of protons into like ATP. In more primitive life, you may have some metabolic processes that will turn sugar into high energy chemicals. So you have to have an engine to produce energy, but you also have to have information to direct that energy in a way that produces the order that you need. So in life, you have these very complex chemicals like enzymes that force molecules into arrangements which create the molecular machinery of the cell. So information is necessary for life, and information is only a product of the mind.